watching this virtual farm field trip from in the chat. We have a group of fourth graders joining us from Wilhelmina, Oregon. Thank you for being here. Another group from Sherman County and Philomath. Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual farm field trip. We are live today at Live Local Organic in Milwaukee, Oregon. My name is Bella, and I'm a college student at Oregon State University, and I'll be the moderator today. Before we start our tour today, you'll see the Q&A feature. This is where you can ask questions throughout the tour. Please only type questions, as this will help us to see the questions and make sure that we can get to as many of them as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce our host and tour guide for today's virtual field trip, Joel Kelly, the co-founder of Live Local Organic. Take it away, Joel.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here with us today. Like Bella said, my name is Joel Kelly and I'm the co-founder of Live Local Organic, and we are broadcasting here today from Milwaukee, Oregon. That's where our warehouse is located, and I'm really excited to share with you about aquaponics, what it is, and why we would do something like this. So the first thing is, what is aquaponics? Aquaponics is the combination of hydroponics, which means growing plants without any soil, and aquaculture, which is the raising of fish. So in our system, we use fish to provide nutrients for our plants, and then the plants, by eating up all of those nutrients, purify the water for the fish, and it creates a really amazing symbiotic relationship between the fish and the plants. So as you can see over here, this is our fish tank that I'm standing next to right now. We use a fish that's called tilapia, and tilapia provides a really great nutrient for the plants, and they're really easy to raise. They're really fun to hang out with, and sometimes we even give them names, and it's just a really great fish for aquaponics. So the water from our fish tank will pump out of the fish tank through our filtration system. And this is where we filter out any of the solids that are still in the water from the fish. It takes them out, and then it goes through some other biological filtrations, which clean the water and break it down so that the fish waste gets turned into nutrients and plant food. After that, the water drains into the grow beds where the plants are, and the plants eat up that really fresh, healthy nutrient, and it helps the plants to grow really well. Now, a lot of times when I tell people about aquaponics, one of the questions that I get is it really possible for plants to grow in a warehouse in the middle of a city? And the answer is yes. If you think about it, the main things that plants need in order to grow are water, and we give them that through the fish tank, nutrients, and that comes from the fish themselves. The third thing is light. Outside, plants get that from the sun, but inside, we use artificial lights. And then the last thing plants need in order to grow is air. So the answer is yes. Plants can get all the things that they need in order to grow in some place like a warehouse. And the next question that I get when I tell people about aquaponics is, why would we do something like this? Wouldn't it be easier just to grow the plants outside? And that's true in some cases. But there's some plants that are really difficult to grow in the winter time, or even sometimes in the summertime if it gets too hot or if it gets too cold. And so when we grow in a warehouse, it allows us to protect the plants and grow in what's called a controlled environment, where we can control the air temperature and how much the light the plants are getting, and we can protect them from pests or from storms or anything else like that. So it provides a really safe environment for the plants to grow. And as you can see here, we're growing lettuce. It's mostly butterhead lettuce in one of our tower systems. And you can see the LED lights up here. And what's cool about the LED lights is that they're very efficient. And so it doesn't give us a really expensive power bill when we're growing the lettuce. And this is the prototype system. So this is the first stop for the tour today. Right off the bat, do we have any questions while we start walking to our second area?
We sure do. We have one question, and Megan wants to know, What are the nutrients that help the plants grow?
That is a really great question, Megan, and it's a question that I get a lot. There are 13 different nutrients that plants need in order to grow in a healthy way. And I'm not sure that I can remember all of them off the top of my head, but I'll give it my best shot. So they are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the big three. After that, it's calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, manganese, nickel, chloride, molybdenum, and I don't remember the last two, so you got me on that. But yeah, so there's 13 different nutrients, and they can all come from the fish, or if there's ever a time where they're in a little bit low quantities and the fish aren't providing enough nutrients, we can also add the nutrients in by either spraying it on the plants or putting it into the water of the fish tank. So that was a great question. Any other questions off the bat while we're walking over to the second spot?
Yeah, another question is, do you have to water the plants?
So yeah, that is another great question, and maybe I should have pointed that out. The water that gets pumped out of the fish tank is what waters the plants actually. So we don't have to do any additional watering after that. It all just comes from the fish tank. So yeah, some really, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. One last question is, how many fish are in each tank?
So it really depends on the size of the system. As you can see, we have some different size systems here that are different than the first one that I showed you. But it all depends on the size. It can range anywhere from 50 fish to, in some of our larger systems, we can have upwards of 750 to 1,000 fish. So in this whole facility, there's probably somewhere around 7,000 to 9,000 fish at any given time. So yeah, those are some really great questions. Thank you all for asking them. Make sure to keep those in mind if, as I'm going, if you have another question about something that I'm doing, and I'll take some more questions here in a little bit. So this is our seeding area, and this is where the whole process starts with aquaponics for us. And there are a lot of different ways to do aquaponics. The way that we do it is the way that we think is the best, but there's a lot of other people who use different types of lighting or different types of seed sprouting materials or different ways to water the plants and different things like that. So this is just the way that we do it. As you can see here, we use little containers of what's called compressed peat moss. And that's the container part outside of here. The reason we use that is because it's 100% organic and it's totally biodegradable. So we don't have to use plastic that's going to go into a garbage can or anything like that. We are one of the first certified organic aquaponics farms in the entire country, right here in Oregon. And it was a difficult process to get that started because we had to work with our certifier to kind of work out some of the kinks and the challenges of that process. But we're really excited to tell people that we use only organic materials and we have a 100% organic product. What's inside the peat moss is a combination of ground up coconuts and a little white rock called perlite. And so the perlite provides a nice area environment so that it's easy for the plant roots to grow and spread throughout the product. And then the coconut husk makes sure to retain water so that the plant has enough water while it's growing. And then we use these vibrating seed trowels to spread the seeds across the plants. If you push this little red button right here, it starts vibrating, and then you can spread the seeds along the tops of the plants, just like that. After that, we take this whole container and we move it into our germination and nursery area, where, as you can see over here, there's a couple of these trays that have plastic tops over the top of them. What that does is it increases the humidity, and so it makes it a really wet and moist environment, and that helps the seeds to germinate. And so we always get a really good germination rate. So that means the seeds start sprouting. After that, it takes about 4 weeks for the plants to grow in the nursery area and the nursery environment before we transfer them over to our second area, which you can see behind me over here, which is our grow out area. Once they're into the grow out area, it takes about 4 weeks more for them to be a harvestable product that we can bring out to the stores. And we're in stores up in Washington, but also here in Portland. And we even go down as far as Salem, Oregon, and Eugene, Oregon. I heard that there's some people coming in from Corvallis. We're in the Fred Meyer in Corvallis, and in the Albany area. So if you ever see our product there, then you know it comes from right here in Milwaukee, Oregon. And this is the seating area. So next up, I'll show you over to our harvesting area. While we're walking over, oh yeah, go ahead with the questions.
Okay, perfect. One question is, how do the light bulbs make the plants grow when it's not the sun?
That is a great question. We have some very intelligent people that are watching this video today. So, right, the sun gives out light, and it gives it out in a certain intensity and in a certain spectrum. So there's actually, even though we can't see it, there's blue light, and there's also red light and yellow light and green light. It's all in the sun, even though it looks clear, or it just kind of looks like white light to us. There's a whole spectrum of light in there. And then there's also an intensity. That's why you can't look at the sun, because it's so intense that it would maybe burn your eyes. And so those are the two main things that are needed for plants, is basically they absorb that spectrum and they absorb that intensity, and they use that in order to grow. So as long as a light has a similar spectrum, so it means it has all the colors that are needed for the plant in order to grow, and it has a similar intensity, which is why you couldn't use like, you know, your night light or a lamp at home in order to grow plants, because it's not strong enough and it doesn't have the right spectrum of all the different colors that are in that light. So we use special lights. They're just for growing plants, and they have the perfect spectrum and the perfect intensity that's made just for growing plants. So that was a great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, Peyton is wondering, how do the plants absorb the nutrients?
That's a great question too. You said Peyton asked that question?
Yep.
Excellent. Great question, Peyton. So the plants, when they're growing, I can actually, if you want to bring the camera over this way, I can show you what it looks like once we put them into this area. So the plants, they grow in this little peat moss cube with the coconut husk and the perlite in the middle. But what happens after a while is roots start coming through the bottom, and those roots go into the water that are in these grow beds. And the plant absorbs the nutrients out of the water through the roots, and that's how the nutrients get into the plant. So the nutrients come from the fish tank into the grow bed, and then when we put the water into the grow bed, the plant's able to absorb it.
Very cool. Another question is from Tracy, and she's wondering how long you have been doing aquaponics.
Oh, that is a great question that I forgot to say in the beginning. I've been doing aquaponics for 7 years. So I graduated from the University of Oregon down in Eugene. I know there's probably some Duck fans on the video today, so I'm a big Duck fan. I studied business entrepreneurship, so I didn't study agriculture or farming or anything like that. I actually never thought that I would get into agriculture. But then when I graduated, I was approached with somebody who had the idea for aquaponics, and it sounded really cool because I'm really passionate about sustainability and healthy food and doing things that are good for business, but also good for the world and good for the planet. And aquaponics really fits all of those things. So after I graduated 7 years ago in 2013, I immediately started aquaponics and started Live Local Organic, and I've been doing it for the last 7 years.
Very cool. And then one other question is from Mitch, and he is wondering, how many fish do you need per plant?
So this is actually an interesting question in the world of aquaponics, because different people will tell you different things. It depends on the type of plant that you're growing. So if you're growing something like basil, like we have here, it doesn't need as many nutrients as maybe something like a tomato plant, because a tomato plant, if you think about when you see one in a garden somewhere, they get really big and they make all these tomatoes and they, do all kinds of things. And so they need a whole bunch of nutrients. But for a basil plant, you don't need as much. And so I would say, we have about 1,200 plants in this bed, and they're all basil plants and different types of herbs. And we have probably about 200 fish in the fish tank. And so somebody that's really good at math can do that math problem for me. I guess that would be maybe 60 plants per fish or so. Somebody can check my math on that. I don't know, but that's a great question. Any other questions right away, or should we get into the next part?
I'll have one more question and then we'll go into the next part. Kodiak wants to know, how long does it take for the plants to grow?
Great question, Cody. So yeah, it usually takes about 8 weeks. And I usually tell people around 8 weeks because that's kind of the average amount of time. But in reality, it depends on the time of year. So even though we're in a warehouse, it still can get pretty hot in the summer and pretty cold in the winter. And so in the winter time, it can take maybe 9 weeks or even 10 weeks to go from seed to full harvest. Whereas in the summer, sometimes it can take only 5 or 6 weeks, because if the weather's warmer and the temperature is higher, then all of the processes happen so much faster. So the fish waste gets converted into nutrients faster, the plants are able to uptake it faster, and they're able to grow faster. So I'd say on average about 8 weeks or so, but that can vary depending on the time of year. Great questions again. So this is our variety bed. The main product that we grow here at Live Local Organic is basil, and we always sell it living because we feel like that's the freshest way to get it to a customer is when it's still alive. So plants start losing their nutritional value immediately after you harvest them and cut them off of the stem. And by the time that most plants get to a store, if it's been 2 weeks or even 3 weeks sometimes, it's lost about 60 to 70% of its nutritional value. And so one of the reasons that we sell everything live is because it retains 100% of its nutritional value. And that's one of the other reasons that we do aquaponics, is because it allows us to grow something like a basil plant during the winter, which you wouldn't be able to do in Oregon. If you tried to do that outside, it would be too cold for it and it would die. But since we're here in the warehouse, we're able to grow basil in the winter and get it to the store that we sell it in 1 to 2 days. And so it gets to the store really quickly. It's still really fresh and really healthy. And basil is just one of the things that you can grow with aquaponics. You can also grow tomatoes and bell peppers. We've even grown wasabi before. And as you can see here, our main focus right now is on herbs. So we've got Thai basil and purple basil. We've got thyme and oregano and sage. So I wish everyone that was on the call today could be here so that you could smell. When you rub the herbs around, it creates a really fun and delicious smell as well. So as I said before, when we harvest a product, we just pull it out and harvest it whole like that. And you can see, here's the roots that are going down. That's where the plant's getting all of its nutrients. And then we put this into a little plastic bag. And this is what the end product looks like. So if any of you have ever seen this at Fred Meyer or Whole Foods or New Seasons Market or some other smaller stores around the area, this is where it comes from. Just this small little farm in Milwaukee, Oregon. So this is our classic basil. This is the main product that we sell. And then this is what the purple basil looks like and the Thai basil. Okay, other questions about that? Anything?
Yes. So another question is, do the plants float in water?
That's another really good question. So the plants don't actually float in the water, but the plants are in, as you can see here, they're in a styrofoam board, and the styrofoam board floats in the water. And so this whole board of plants will be floating. So I guess technically the plants are floating in the water, but it's nothing. If you just put this in the water, it would drop and sink to the bottom. But since we put them in these styrofoam rafts, the raft floats in the water. And this system that we have here, it's called a flood and a drain system. And so that means the water comes into the grow bed and it'll stay in the grow bed for a little while, and then it'll completely drain out and go back into the fish tank. There's other types of systems that have water in them at all times. Our system over there, actually, that we first started at, it has water in it at all times. And the water doesn't actually need to drain out of that system. So yeah, I guess the fish do sort of float in the grow beds when they're in the styrofoam rafts. Other questions?
Yeah, another good question is what happens if the power goes out?
Oh, and so relevant to right now, right? Because so many of us lost power recently. So if the power goes out, the plants can stay alive for up to 5 or 6 days without light. What happens is they'll immediately when the power goes out and the lights are off, the plant sort of realizes like, oh no, there's no light, and it'll start stretching and sort of reaching for the light. So if you ever see a plant that just looks like it's really long and it has really small leaves, it probably doesn't have enough light. But the plants are usually okay as long as the power comes back on within about a week or a couple of days. The real scary thing is the fish. So our fish tanks have air pumps in them that oxygenate the water. It pumps all these little bubbles into the water so that the fish can breathe. Because fish can't breathe if they're just in water without anything happening to the water or any oxygen or any bubbles. They actually take the oxygen out of the water when they breathe through their gills. And so if the power goes out, our fish, if we don't do anything about it, will all be dead within like 8 hours or so, because the oxygen levels in the water will drop. And so obviously we don't want that to happen. So we have a backup generator that's gas powered. And if the power ever goes out for more than a couple hours or so, we turn the backup generator on, and that charges all the air pumps for the fish. And then as long as the air is pumping through the water, the fish will survive and they'll be okay. So yeah, that's a scary situation, especially like the freeze that we just had here in Portland and Salem and up north as well, where the power actually can go out for up to a week or more. Luckily for us, we had the power go out for about 10 seconds and then it came back on. So it wasn't as bad for us. We were really lucky in that situation. But that's definitely a concern, and it's a really good question.
Perfect. There's another question, and Tiffany would like to know what the fish are being fed in order to give the plants the proper nutrients.
Great question. So we feed the fish, it's a fish pellet, and it's just a little brown ball. Actually, we might have some, oh no, I don't think we have any over there. It's a little brown ball, and it's just full of nutrients, and it has all the nutrients that are needed for the plants. And there's, it's actually fairly similar to what you might feed your fish if you have a fish tank at home. It's just like a little kind of ground pebble. And I believe that it is terrestrial animal parts free. So that means that it's probably like corn or soy based or something like that. But then we also have nutrients added in because most fish food doesn't have enough potassium and iron so that after you feed the fish and the fish absorbs what they need in order to grow, there won't be any in the nutrients for the plants. And so for aquaponics, we actually have to have a specialized fish food that has some of those nutrients added into it so that the fish can grow and have everything that they need. And then also from their waste, the plants can grow as well. And then is there another question or should we go to our last little spot?
We'll go to our last spot. That's perfect.
Let's do it. And I'll try to take as many questions as I can before the time's out as well. Okay, so this is sort of our harvesting area. And so this is what the product looks like once it's all ready to harvest and go out to the stores. Like I said, we're in Whole Foods and Fred Meyer and New Seasons Market. And we deliver to all of our stores 2 times per week. And so we only have 9 people on our team, but we deliver to 142 stores. So that's a lot of deliveries. A lot of our time is spent just out on the road getting people their plants. And as you can see here, we've got some plants that are going to be going down to Eugene. I'm going to be taking those down there tomorrow, actually. So if anybody's in the Eugene area, you can look for our little Live Local van delivering products down there. And then we've got some other stuff going to some of our other southern stores. And we just have little labels for which plants are going to be going where. And yeah, we produce about 5,000 to 6,000 plants per week in this area. So we're in about, I'd say 10,000 square feet of growing space here. And so it's not very big, but it's very productive. And that just goes to show how productive and how profitable and good aquaponics can be, just in terms of like a dollars and cents basis, not even thinking about all the other advantages in terms of using less water and being really sustainable. So I don't know if I actually touched on that too much. One of the other reasons that we do aquaponics is because it is so sustainable. It uses about 5% of the water of conventional farming because we just recirculate the water. So we're reusing the same water over and over again because the plants clean it out and the fish add nutrients to it. It also uses much less space than conventional farming. So we can produce as much in this little 10,000 square foot area as maybe 10 acres of farmland. And as time goes on and as the world population increases, the amount of space that we're going to need to grow food is going to increase pretty dramatically. And with everything happening with climate change and other things like that, it's really important for us that we make sure that we can have enough food to feed the world and to feed people. And so I think aquaponics is a really great resource and a great way to do that.
Great. I have a question that a lot of people are wondering, and that is, how long do the fish live, and what do you do with the fish that don't survive?
Of course, yeah. So the fish that don't survive, the fish that die before we can sell them. Great question. Yeah, we just throw them in the garbage. Really, it's pretty sad. But there's not really much else that we can do with them. We throw them in the garbage, and it doesn't happen super often in a healthy system, but it does happen periodically. The fish normally they can live up to 5 to 7 years if we just let them grow old until they died. But we actually sell the fish as well because tilapia is an edible fish. And when it's grown in an organic environment, it's really fresh and it's really healthy. And so we have a store that's called ABC Seafood up here in Portland. And they take all of the tilapia that we can give them. So they're the only store that we have to work with. And so when we sell it to them, we just put the tilapia in a little tank and we drive it over there and drop it off. And then they sell the tilapia actually live. And so we don't have to worry about killing them or processing them or anything like that. Other questions?
Perfect. Yes, so this will be our last question. And that is, what skills do you use in your job that students are learning about now?
Such a good question and so important, because when I was a student, I can remember being in the classroom and being like, math, what do I need math for? Like, what am I ever going to use this for? Or learning science and, about biology and learning about plants and how plants work and thinking like, I want to be a professional basketball player. I'm never going to use this in my entire life. And lo and behold, here I am using all of these things that I learned in school. And so I'm really glad that I paid attention. So we use things like science and biology to know how the plants are growing and to be able to diagnose, like, hey, if there's an issue with the plants, if there's a nutrient deficiency or something like that, it's really important to have an understanding of biology and chemistry so that we can diagnose that effectively and make sure that we're putting out the healthiest plants possible. We use math a lot because we're always constantly innovating here and building new designs and new ideas. In order to do that, we have to use a lot of like technical math skills like geometry and algebra and different things like that, where we design like, okay, this is going to be this length and this is going to be this length, and we need to add an angle of this in order to support this. And so there's a lot of engineering that we use as well, and math, and then also robotics and technology. There's a lot of technical aspects to something like this because so much of it is automated. The water comes on automatically, the fans come on and off automatically, the lights come on and off automatically. And so working with the lights and all the technical aspects of that and all the automation, it's important to have a good understanding of, robotics and electrical components and stuff like that. So obviously it's hard for one person to have all of that information, which is why we have different people that specialize in different areas. And so you don't necessarily need to be an expert in everything, but it's good to have a good foundational knowledge of everything and then maybe become an expert in one or two things, I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everyone who joined us on our virtual farm field trip today. And thank you, Joel, for taking time out of your busy schedule to teach students in the state of Oregon about aquaponics. And we hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for being